and the game about halfway through sort of asks you like to make this decision that maybe results in her dying. And it's a choice that falls completely flat. And it's not it doesn't simply come down to like suspension of disbelief. Because we can all watch Batman, and we know Christian Bale isn't a vigilante who dresses up like a bat. But all we got to do is just pretend that for 2 hours, and we'll have a good time. And that's not really hard to do. But Infamous actually goes this extra mile and saying, okay, pretend this girl isn't a virtual character. Sure, fine, no problem, whatever. But then it also says, quick, please manufacture this entire 2-year history with this woman. Have emotions toward her that you would have toward a woman you've been dating for 2 years. Care about her in that way, so that when we ask you to make these choices about her, it'll affect you as if you were thinking about your own girlfriend. And it doesn't work that way. It's not a matter of suspension of disbelief. It's a matter of you're asking me. It's like you're asking me to grow, an inch just by willing it. I can't, empathize with someone like that. And not only that, but Trish, unlike all these other characters I mentioned, is completely useless to your actual minute-to-minute gameplay. She's just some little narrative ornament that dangles there, so you have no reason to care about her because she's not helping you achieve your goals. I would call this the Kim Bauer problem if that weren't so stupid, so I'm not going to call it that. But if anybody's seen the first season of 24, otherwise known as the good season, Jack Bauer's daughter Kim gets kidnapped, and everybody hates Kim because she's really dumb. She does a bunch of dumb things. She almost gets captured like 1,000 times. And but it's okay that we don't like Kim. I mean, ideally we would, but it's okay that we don't. It's not a deal breaker because Kim exists so that Jack Bauer can have this thing to go after, so he can have a reason to torture people and cut their fingers off and stick towels down their throats and stuff. Because that's what we want to see. We want to see his intensity. And we understand how much he loves Kim, even if we don't share that, that's fine. But if you were doing a 24 game, then if the player is Jack Bauer, the player has to care about Kim Bauer exactly as much as Jack Bauer does in the show. So otherwise, if we hate Kim Bauer as a player playing Jack Bauer as much as we do as an audience member watching Kim Bauer, then all of a sudden narrative momentum is gone from this game. We don't have any narrative reason to actually save her. We're just, it's just a game. But speaking of Jack Bauer, there's also an issue of, and all the characters I've been talking about so far are sort of non-player supporting characters. But what about characters that the players actually control? In most third-person games, you're sort of, for the most part, controlling a cooler version of yourself. You play Solid Snake. Solid Snake is just a more badass, more David Hayter voiced version of yourself that you might want to take. You play Uncharted. Nathan Drake is a more charming, more wisecracking, more Nathan Fillion-esque sort of person than you are, but maybe the kind of person that you want to be. But at the same time, there's also this risk that you take when you create a character like that who is sort of meant to be a better version of the character, which is that sometimes they'll do things you might really strongly disagree with. So there are moments in Uncharted 2 where you might go up behind a guy and snap his neck because you gotta do it. But then, Nathan will go, ha, that's your neck, and he'll fucking laugh about it. Like it's no big deal. He thinks it's really funny that you just snapped the guy's neck. And if you can get behind that, if you're in the mindset of like, well, it's just a game, it doesn't matter, it is kind of funny, then, fine, whatever, you can keep going, and it's no big deal. But if you actually think it's kind of disturbing to snap a guy's neck and then joke about it, then all of a sudden your agency over Nathan becomes this weird, creepy, kind of perverted thing. It's not like you and Nathan sharing this cool adventure together. It's like you're controlling this psychopath who thinks it's fun to joke about this kind of stuff. And the adventure becomes a little bit perverse and a little bit less enjoyable, when it's been tainted by that. And that's why, you see a lot of games trying to make player avatars who are basically just blank slates that you put your own personality onto. When you play Shadow of the Colossus, Wander, he has a name so that we can refer to him by something in forum posts, but in reality, he's just you. Whatever you want to put onto Wander's personality, you can. Wander will never stab a Colossus in the head and then write it down going fucking booyah, and then like doing like devil horns or something like that. He's not that kind of a guy. He may not have any cool wisecracking shit like Nathan Drake has. I almost Nathan Fillion. But he's also not going to give you that sort of that really bad dissonance. And Gordon Freeman was voted by GameSpot's readers the coolest video game hero of all time, and it's not a coincidence why. Gordon is us to some extent, but there's also sort of an inherent pact that a game forces the player to make if you're going to make a game where the main character is the player and there's no other personality for that main character. Which is to say that if you're playing Uncharted and you as Nathan turn to your left and try to shoot Elena Fisher in the face and kill her, but you can't, then you've got immediate narrative explanation for why that won't happen. Nathan Drake isn't you, and that's not something he would do, therefore you can't do it. I mean, he's supposed to be a cooler version of you, but he still is this other person. But you don't have that excuse in Half-Life if you point your gun at Alex Vance and you try to kill her, and you can't. So the games like this sort of go through this thing that I call the suspension of agency, which is different from the suspension of disbelief that I talked about earlier, and it's just something I made up. So I don't know if that's good or bad thing, right? But you go through this thing, and you basically say, I will let the game forbid me from doing certain things if in exchange I will be more immersed in the story to the point where I feel like a character in it. In response, the game will not forbid me from doing something I feel like I need to do, nor force me to do anything I absolutely refuse to do without giving me a spectacularly good reason, narrative reason, that deepens my immersion in the story. If the game breaks this fact, my control will feel meaningless, and I will no longer feel immersed in the story. And I'm going to explain what this means in more detail right now. But, you know, in Half-Life, as I said, you can't shoot Alex. If you point your gun at Alex, Gordon will just lower his gun, and even if you fire, then the bullets will just go through and nothing happens. And on the one hand, that's a pretty serious infringement on the player's agency and their freedom. You know, you should be able to shoot whoever you want. You have a gun, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to. But at the same time, the fact that you can't kill Alex keeps the player immersed in the narrative. It keeps you from being pulled out of it just accidentally or whatever. And furthermore, it's not something that you really have any reason to want to do. Alex is really helpful, as I said before, and there's no advantage to you killing her beyond like morbid curiosity or just because you're crazy or whatever. Like you can have reasons to do it just as a player, just dicking around. But if you're interested in the story, you have no real reason to kill her. So that's something that you can't do that you don't really want to do. It's an okay thing for this suspension of agency. It's something that you're okay with giving up generally. Or if it's something that you really don't want to do that you have to do, like incinerating the weighted companion cube. You know, nobody wants to incinerate the weighted companion cube, regardless of whether or not you know you thought you spent 30 minutes doing it. I didn't. But nobody wants to kill it, but it's okay that you have to because the game gives you this really cool narrative reason that you have to. It says, hey, look, GLaDOS is making you do this, and by doing this, you are going to hate GLaDOS so much more. And that when you get to that final boss fight and you're incinerating parts of her personality, that is going to feel so much more satisfying because you're basically avenging the weighted companion cube. The revenge story in Portal is more relevant and more personally affecting than the revenge story in The Saboteur. And I just thought of that as I said it, and now I'm really proud of myself. But you know, contrast that against something like No Russian from Modern Warfare 2, where you're the CIA agent, and you know, he has a couple lines in like the loading screens, but once you take over this guy, he doesn't have a personality anymore. He's just basically you. And you're the CIA agent in this little terrorist cell, and they start killing all these civilians. And me, as a person who's spent my entire life playing video games where I kill terrorists, I'm not okay with seeing this happen. This scene is about making you horrified. It makes you not want it to happen to some extent. And so, you know, I turn and I try to kill the bad guys. I try to shoot the terrorists. And rather than giving me a narrative reason for my not being able to do that like Portal does, rather than doing something cool that deepens my immersion in the story, the game developers just come down from heaven, make you immediately die, and say, no, it's alright, you can't do that because it fucks with our story. That's not cool, don't do it because we didn't think hard enough to come up with a better situation for this where your agency isn't compromised. The game basically comes down, just says that your agency doesn't matter in the face of their story, and so you're ripped out of the experience. And, well, I mean, I was ripped out of the experience personally. I mean, I have a lot of people like No Russian for whatever reason. But I didn't like it. And, you know, even in a game where you're not playing as this blank slate character, Prince of Persia, if I can just spoil every single game that's ever been made for you. Prince and Elga go around trying to banish this guy called Armand. It doesn't fucking matter. But Elga dies as you're banishing this god. And once she dies, the only option you as the prince have, you're still in control of the prince. The only option you have is to go around the game world that you just saved, cutting down all the trees of life that you just planted, and bringing back the god so that you can revive Elga. Why? Because it's something the prince would do. The prince likes Elga so much that he's willing to undo every single thing that he just did to get her back. Only I'm not willing to do that, because that is fucking dumb. I am not the prince, but I'm in control of the prince, but my only option is to do something really, really stupid just because the prince would do it. And at that point, there's an issue that I would call player irrelevance, or I would call it if I hadn't actually deleted that title. But player relevance is like, if a game treats the desires of my avatar as more important than my own, why am I even playing? Why am I being asked to control someone if I don't have any control when it really matters? Why am I not just watching a film or reading a book? What's the point of my presence if this character is going to do what they're going to do anyway? You know, if you're watching, you can argue that, you know, that's an interesting way of developing a character and deepening the player's connection to that character by making them do something they don't want to do just because it's something the character would do. But that's what linear media is really, really good at. That's what non-interactive media is based on. You don't have to approve of every single thing that Don Draper does in Mad Men.